Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're cracking open a really fascinating text. It's over 160 years old, but honestly, it feels incredibly relevant. It's the Kitáb-i-Iqán, which basically translates to the Book of Certitude. Bahá'u'lláh wrote it between 1861 and 62. And our sources, well, they frame it as this huge, sweeping reinterpretation of, religious history, prophecy, pretty much everything.
It really is foundational. The aim seems to be providing the single lens, a way to view all the previous revelations, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, others, and see them as part of one continuous story.
One single story. Okay.
Yeah. So our mission today really is to dig into what the book calls its core certitudes. There are about 7 key themes. And we need to look at them and ask, could these ideas actually find universal acceptance, like across different religions, philosophy, maybe even modern science?
That's a big ask. Because this text, it sort of changes the rules of the game for faith, doesn't it? We've kind of grouped these 7 ideas. Think of it like a master class on unity, context, and perception. So let's start right at the beginning with that age-old problem, religious exclusivity.
Exactly. That brings us straight to theme 1, the unity of all manifestations of God. The Iqán puts forward this idea that all the divine messengers, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, others too, they're essentially just different expressions of one single eternal reality.
So not founders of totally separate religions?
No, more like continuous expressions of the same divine teacher. There's a quote our sources highlight: all the prophets are manifestations of that one reality and dawning places of that light.
Okay, that sounds unifying, beautiful even. But let's push on that a bit. If Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Bahá'u'lláh, if they're all expressions of the same reality, doesn't that kind of dilute the uniqueness that, billions of people feel is central to their specific faith, that sense of exclusivity?
Well, that's precisely the point. It is a direct challenge to that exclusivity. It's doing 2 things at once, really. First, it's laying down a philosophical basis for interfaith dialogue, kind of unifying the past. And second, maybe more controversially, it's asserting the author's own place in that same lineage.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about the past.
No. For, say, scholars in comparative religion, this idea can seem like a solution. It resolves historical conflicts. So you see higher acceptance there. But for traditions built on finality or unique one-time event, well, this claim feels like direct competition. It's understandably tough.
I see. It's a solution that forces a really hard choice, theologically speaking. Okay, so if we accept this unity, then the story can't be over, right? Which leads us neatly into theme 2, the continuity of revelation.
Exactly right. The text is very explicit. It rejects the idea of a closed book, a final word from God, no closed canons. There's a great analogy used in the sources. The manifestations of God are like the rising sun, each illuminating the world in its time.
Like the sun rising every day. You wouldn't say yesterday's sunrise was the last sunrise ever.
Precisely. You expect it to rise again when the conditions are right.
I like that. Because it connects interestingly to how we think about knowledge today, especially scientific knowledge. Science works on open inquiry, right? Always expecting new discoveries, truth unfolding continuously, not settling on a final answer.
That's a key parallel the text seems to draw. This idea resonates strongly with, say, progressive theologians or philosophers. People who see that society evolves, human needs change. So truth needs to be dynamic to stay relevant.
And the resistance.
Again, it often comes from an orthodox circle. Those invested in preserving historical structures, they might see continuity or any new revelation as undermining the original authority, diluting the message.
Okay, so we've got who the messengers are, one essence, continuously appearing. Now, how do we read what they said? Theme 3 is about contextual interpretation of religious truth. Because, let's face it, if they're all one essence, why do their laws and teachings sometimes look so different?
The Iqán addresses this directly. It says, the differences we see come from their specific missions, not their essential nature. So the content laws about marriage, fasting, social rules, you have to understand that within its specific historical and cultural setting.
Right, this sounds very much like modern hermeneutics. The whole theory of interpretation we use for ancient texts or legal documents. Is the text basically saying we must apply this critical contextual reading to Scripture itself?
That's exactly the demand, yes. And today, this contextual approach is, well, it's fundamental in religious studies, anthropology. It's how we can read ancient texts with empathy. Understand why a certain law made sense in, say, the 7th century, even if it doesn't fit the 21st.
It fosters empathy. That makes sense.
Yeah, so acceptance is pretty high in academic and interfaith settings. But again, if you insist on applying every single historical rule, literally, ignoring time and culture, then this principle is a major hurdle.
Which sets up theme 4 perfectly. Symbolic and metaphorical interpretation of Scripture. If context is key, then surely literalism isn't always the way to go. What's the instruction here?
The core instruction is pretty clear. Step away from bodily literalism. Read sacred texts symbolically. Use what the text calls spiritual light. So if a prophecy mentions mountains moving or stars falling, it's probably not about geology or astronomy.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting philosophically, isn't it? Because modern cognitive linguistics actually backs this up. Metaphor isn't just fancy window dressing in language. It's fundamental to how our brains grasp complex, abstract ideas, like spiritual concepts.
Exactly. Trying to force spiritual ideas like heaven or divine justice into purely physical, literal terms, it just shrinks them, makes them reductive.
So the text sees literalism as limiting.
Deeply limiting, yes. Spiritually limiting. This symbolic approach. It's common in mystical traditions worldwide, and it resonates in intellectual circles. But it's constantly challenged by fundamentalist views that, rely heavily on a single literal reading of prophecy for their authority.
Okay, so the text is asking for a pretty sophisticated reading: unity, continuity, context, symbolism. Who typically pushes back against that kind of interpretation? That leads us right into the book's critique in theme 5, the role of religious leaders in rejecting new revelation.
Yes, and this part is, remarkably direct. Bahá'u'lláh argues that religious authorities often reject new truth. And not always because of genuine theological issues, but because, as the text puts it, they are ensnared by prejudice and love of position.
Wow, so it's an institutional critique about power.
It really is. It's suggesting that preserving authority can sometimes overshadow the search for truth.
And history seems to bear this out, unfortunately. You see this pattern, right? Historians point to the rejection of Jesus by the Pharisees, or the resistance to the Bab by the clergy in Persia, which was the immediate backdrop for this book being written.
It's almost a sociological pattern. Think about any established system facing disruption, like traditional photography when digital came along. The institutions built around film fought hard against the change, not necessarily because digital was worse, but because their authority, their whole setup, was tied to the old way.
That's a great analogy.
So while historians and sociologists might nod along with this analysis of institutional resistance, it's obviously, it's highly controversial for the institutions themselves. It questions their legitimacy, fundamentally.
Okay, let's shift from the external critique to the internal. How do we as individuals actually perceive truth, according to this book? Theme 6 introduces this fascinating concept, the inner eye, or chashanidil, a spiritual faculty.
Yes, it's a really deep mystical idea. It's described as this inherent capacity we have to perceive divine truth directly. But it's not something you get just from reading books. It's awakened through detachment, spiritual practice, purifying the self.
Like cleaning a lens so you can see clearly.
That's a good way to put it. The idea is that our intellect takes us part of the way, but this spiritual faculty, the inner eye, is needed for full perception.
This sounds familiar from mystical traditions across the board. In psychology, we might talk about intuition, maybe non-rational ways of knowing.
Right, but the text frames the chashanidil as something more, metaphysical, an actual spiritual organ that needs to be activated, not just a gut feeling.
Can you clarify that difference, metaphysical versus gut feeling?
Yeah, it's important. A gut feeling is often seen as our subconscious processing past experiences. The inner eye, as presented here, is a capacity to perceive unconditioned truth. Truth revealed directly, independent of personal history. There's that quote. If the eye of the heart is opened, one beholds the beauty of the beloved in all things. It's about a different kind of seeing.
I see. And that's where science might struggle.
Well, psychology might accept the symbolic value of intuition. But when you talk about a distinct metaphysical faculty that responds to spiritual discipline, you're moving beyond what empirical science can easily test or verify.
Okay, got it. That brings us to the final theme, where the text pivots. It goes from these universal principles to something very specific. Theme 7, Islamic proofs of the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh. After laying all this groundwork for how to read any scripture, the Iqan applies it to make its own case.
Correct. The whole book was actually written to answer questions from a specific person, an uncle of the Bab, who came from a Shia background. So Bahá'u'lláh uses all those principles we just discussed, symbolism, context, continuity, to argue that Islamic texts, including Shia prophecies and Quranic symbols, actually point towards a new revelation, his own and the Bab's before him.
And eschatology plays a big role here, right? Beliefs about the end times.
Yes, exactly. The text takes Shia eschatological concepts, ideas about the return of the Imams, the day of resurrection, and interprets them spiritually, metaphorically, not as literal, physical events. It argues these are symbols for the appearance of a new divine messenger.
So it's applying its own rules of interpretation to make its claim.
Precisely. It's a very detailed theological argument. But whether it convinces you really depends on whether you accept those first 6 principles about how to read Scripture in the first place.
Right. So just to recap, unity of messengers, continuity of revelation, reading with context, using symbolism, being aware of institutional bias, developing an inner perception, and then applying all that to specific Islamic proofs. That's quite a journey.
It is. And taken together, the Kitáb-i-Iqán offers what you might call a universal hermeneutic of certitude, a method for finding certainty. It really reframes religious belief. It's less about static rules, more about an active, ongoing journey. It demands inquiry, humility, and that deep contextual reading. It's an invitation to engage with truth, not just passively accept dogma.
An invitation, and the text itself ends with one, doesn't it? Baha'u'llah's message, as our source quotes it, is quite direct. O people of the world, meditate upon the verses of God that you may perceive their mysteries.
It puts the responsibility back on the individual seeker.
It's a call to look deeper using these tools, and we've seen how these principles, though ancient, connect surprisingly well with modern thinking and, anthropology, linguistics, even psychology.
They do bridge those worlds in interesting ways.
Yeah. Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought to maybe chew on. We live in this age of just overwhelming information, right? Constant strings of facts, competing stories, deepfakes, everything vying for our attention. So thinking about the tools the Iqan offers, which one do you think is the most essential for cutting through that noise today, for finding genuine insight? Is it the commitment to contextual interpretation? Is it the power of symbolic reading? Or is it the need to actively cultivate that inner eye? Something to consider as you navigate the often confusing mysteries of our modern world.